Hello and welcome to Western Perspective. I'm Nelson Liu. At a time when there's so much confusion during the coronavirus crisis, Fiona Perry herself has become the sound of clarity. She's a sign language interpreter at Auslan with 15 years of experience. In a feature video interview this week, Fiona talks about her journey as she brings to the fore the importance of signing to the next generation.
Fiona, thanks for talking to us today.
Pleasure.
Are you able to tell us a bit about yourself and what motivated you to learn Auslan?
Okay, both of my parents were profoundly deaf, so I was born into a deaf family, so sign language is my first language, and I learned English second.
What gives you a motivation for you to become a professional interpreter?
I love the language, I love the culture, and I love the fact that we were able to build a bridge to ensure that the deaf and hard of hearing community receive the message equally the same as any other person in the community.
What does it feel like to be standing beside the Premier on TV?
I love all my interpreting jobs. All my interpreting jobs are very, very important. It's very different to stand next to the Premier. It's certainly an honour to be able to interpret for the government in any situation. But it is different. It's very different to my one-on-one jobs, certainly.
Do you get nervous at all?
I always get nervous before any interpreting job because it's so important. But it is very different having the camera and you have no deaf people there, where usually you are interpreting to a deaf person, you see them nodding, they understand what you're saying. But this is a camera, it is very, very different, but it's still part of a job that I love doing.
Are there any challenges in communicating with some users with difference between Auslan and English language that are hard to bridge?
I'll explain how I actually deliver the language that might help you to understand. You listen to English and then you put it into Auslan and then you obviously sign it to the community. So two separate languages, so you have to understand both languages to be able to then interpret to the community.
If the Premier looks serious, you look serious.
Yes.
And when he laughs, so do you.
Correct,
And when the
correct.
journals also look serious, so do you as well. Is that part of the trick to basically not just be a communicator on words, but a communicator on facial expression as well?
How it works is we are portraying, as with my colleague Diane, when we're working together, especially she's an interpreter, I'm an interpreter, we both have our own styles of interpreting, but the main aim is for us to be able to give the message across exactly how the hearing audience hears. And how we do that is through our body language and facial expressions that will link in to the person who's speaking, their tone of voice, then we portray that. So we're mirroring. If they've got a very important message to give, our body language and facial expressions would show that.
Are you able to talk a bit about the accessibility issue at the moment, particularly what deaf people are facing and the challenges they're dealing with during this period?
Once again, it comes down to receiving the accurate, correct information. And with these press conferences, this is what they receive. And it's vital. This is life or death. So we are giving them the message into their own language, which then enables them to understand exactly how serious this pandemic is.
Is there anything you think the viewers should know about accessibility?
It's just making sure that they understand whatever the message is in their language. English is their second language. The English word they may read and they may not understand that fully, but to actually receive it in their first language, they fully then totally understand exactly what they have to do.
So what's your message to young people who want to do what you do, follow your footsteps and be an Auslan interpreter?
There are courses to do full-time to become fluent in the language, and then you learn your interpreting in a course as well. But for now, I would suggest, while we're all at home in this pandemic, Access Plus, WA Deaf, does have classes online for Auslan learners. So look at their Facebook page and then you can start learning the language, and that can then lead you into a career like mine. You have to understand how the language works and how to then interpret in that particular language. So you learn that as you go along. But it's just making sure that you listen, make sure you understand what the message means, because we interpret a meaning, not the verbatim word. So they would learn all of that through their training.
Fiona, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And now, AMA WA President Dr Andrew Miller makes his comments about COVID-19 in WA this week.
Hi, welcome. Just a quick Sunday afternoon update while the baby's in the shower. So we've got a few minutes. Hopeful about various things. So firstly, hopeful about vaccine. I had been getting depressed about vaccine when I found out that mumps was the fastest ever vaccine, and that took 4 years to develop. But people in the know on vaccines have been giving me a few tutorials. The fact that GSK and Sanofi have gotten together is a very good sign. Two very big vaccine companies, huge unprecedented money and research, of course, going into all of this around the world. And apparently there was a MERS vaccine that just wasn't particularly commercial. And this one, of course, no doubt will have it. So to get herd immunity, to get to that 90+% so we can protect those who can't be vaccinated, we do need the vaccine. You can't do that with just the disease. And hopefully sometime next year we'll start to see that getting rolled out. In the meantime, let's just think that that's what's going to happen, because otherwise we're going to see rolling waves of this disease most likely. And we don't want to think about that at the moment. In terms of PPE, some hopeful announcements this morning from Greg Hunt mentioning hundreds of millions of masks and that sort of thing, and the potential to return to some procedures that we've stopped doing, which are causing consternation for the patients who are waiting. And of course, we've got a big medical and other workforce sitting around waiting at the moment, some of whom have been through their COVID training, which is great. Others of whom, ironically, are only going to get it when they get a job again in a hospital that has currently laid them off. So we need to get people back to work on something important, not something frivolous. And that work also needs to involve some familiarisation with what's going to happen with COVID as well. But the precursors are sort of starting to line up now that we have some increased testing capability. Preoperative testing would be important. Increased PPE around. Obviously, there needs to be an excess of that that's safe to do these procedures. And we need to look very carefully at what type of procedures we're talking about. So, for example, breast cancer screening. Obviously, for each individual patient, that's not an emergency, but overall it does pick up cancers, so we need to go and get on with it. The same with things like colonoscopies for altered bowel habit. Usually it's not going to be something really serious. Every now and then you'll find one, and so these important procedures need to start to be carried on. And things where patients are in pain, patients are needing to take narcotics, patients are not sleeping at night, their disability is increasing. If they've got a ligament injury, that's not a really super important thing, but over time that will get worse and their joint will start to have problems. So this is why we want to think about elective surgery, but clearly it's a bit of a house of cards. If the COVID numbers start shooting up, if we run out of PPE, if a hospital gets contaminated, then that's really going to upset the whole process. So we need to do it very carefully, in a reversible way, orderly fashion, and it'll be good to be able to help some of those patients and get some of that idle workforce doing something at this point to keep a readiness in the workforce as well, rather than laying off nurses and having them going and trying to find other work. Testing obviously would be part of that pre-op regime. There's been a bit of talk around testing. Quick revision on testing. You have the nose looking for the virus itself in a thing called a polymerase chain reaction, the PCR. That's the gold standard. And even that one, if you don't get the swab all the way down the nose, it can be a false negative. So, and it has some lab limitation, but generally pretty good. The one that's been in the media a bit, it's been trialled by some mining companies to test their workforce, is the one that looks for the footprints of the virus in the body, so the immune system response through something called IgM and IgG. And that's the antibodies that the body produces when it meets the virus and defeats the virus. And it implies immunity, but we're not too sure whether it's lifelong or short-term or how strong that immunity is, but it shows that the virus has been around if you find those specific proteins. Really appealing idea is a drop of blood, put it on a strip, and it comes up and it tells you M or G, tells you those antibodies were there. Unfortunately, of course, some things are not as accurate as you want them to be, and the big problem plaguing these tests is false positives. So it shows up something, but it's not the one you're looking for. And if that is at a high enough level, then it starts to render the test a bit useless, because pretty much every positive result you get is not going to be a real one. Interesting, this week we had a positive one that when they did the nose test, the PCR test looking for virus, they still found some virus there. So they found the IgM, the IgG, and they found virus. So that showed that one at least was probably a true positive. These all need to be verified then in the lab, because in the lab they can do a big BOSS test which tells you whether this little plastic cartridge fingerprint one is actually anywhere near accurate. At this stage, the people who run the labs are very sceptical about it all, but it's certainly worth looking into it, because we do need to eventually find out how far this thing is spread through our community already. So that's either going to be by formal blood tests, serology testing, and I see that another great Australian Nobel Prize winner, Peter Doherty's been saying this week we need to get on with doing blood testing to find out how many of the population have been exposed to this virus before. And we need to do more and more and more of the swab testing, and those patients coming into hospital for the less urgent procedures, they're ones that would be good candidates for that kind of population sample testing. Have a look at Auslan if you're interested in all that stuff. They've done amazing things over there. They're even tracking down which virus each person has as part of their tracing on its specific fingerprint. In terms of the tracing app that the government are wanting to put out, something extra to go on your phone in addition to the 3,000 apps that you don't know what they're there for, that track your every movement. They want another one to see whether you've been close to other people. I don't have a problem with it, because I think I've got a pretty good understanding that Google knows when I go to sleep, when I wake up, and what I've said is going to be an open book anyway to anybody. So one more tracing app to help the government with their tracking of the virus, not of us, because apparently they're not going to know our location from it, just that we've been around someone. I think the problem with it is people are just not going to download it unless they make it compulsory. So up in the air as to whether it's useful. They're saying, well, even if only a few people do it, then that's something. Well, not sure that it's going to be particularly useful if only a few people do it. And that brings us, of course, to schools, the other big topic of the week. Some hope for parents who've been at home with their kids, realising how hard it is to actually be around their child, let alone try and teach that child something I can't even begin to imagine. It's been very important to shut those schools down. It's been up there with the border closures, the travel restrictions, the quarantining, the closure of the schools in order to get ahead, get a breath, have a day where you can get out and say we've had less than 1% increase in cases for 7 days in a row now across the country. School closure, interaction that goes on, including between parents and teachers and so on, incidentally. Can schools go back again? Well, not the way they were before. They would have to go back in a different way. And that's going to be the case with everything we reinvent, whether it's elective surgery, schools, restaurants, bars, and so on, as we go along. Until everybody's vaccinated, we're not going to be going back to the way we were before, because we've still got to have social distancing to slow this thing down. So do we give up a little bit of social distancing at schools in order to get the benefits of education, parents not going insane, kids not going insane, all those good things that come out of it? Well, that depends on exactly what sort of process they set up in the schools, what protection they provide the teachers, what distance, what hygiene, what cleaning. Cleaning is being massively underdone, in my view. This thing lives in droplets for hours and hours and hours, particularly on metal and plastic surfaces that are cool. Kids create droplets. This is just what they do. From them when they wake up in the morning to when they go to bed at night, they're just like a shower of things that are unspeakable. And so I think that some really careful attention needs to be paid to all of that. Rotating kids perhaps through the schools, providing teachers with the kind of cleaning and the PPE they're comfortable with. On the PPE side, there are people who want to wear masks who are being stopped from wearing masks. There's two main groups of them at the moment: people who work in healthcare facilities and people who work in schools. Ability to provide people not just with the scientific protection from the virus, which we know is not particularly good from just a surgical mask, but it is good for stopping people coughing droplets. It is good for stopping people from touching their own face. And you've got to think that if someone does cough in your face, you're better off with a mask and goggles than without, right? So that's why we use it as part of droplet precautions. Telling someone that they can't use that when they also cannot socially distance puts them into an area of quite often of psychological unsafety, if there is a term like that. So put it this way: you're taking away their psychological safety, and that is as important a part for a lot of healthcare workers and a lot of teachers' existence as the actual safety from the virus. So if there is no great cost to providing people with a surgical grade mask, not an N95 filtration type mask, not one of the high-spec ones, but something relatively simple. If we get to a stage as a community where we can afford to provide that, and some goggles, and something to stop people from getting droplets on them, and that provides them with the psychological safety, even if it's unlikely most of the time that they're going to get droplet exposure, I believe that that's a reasonable thing to do. This is not official policy at this stage, but I think it's something we really need to discuss very carefully, because what's not being said is that a lot of workplaces are imperfect. There's a lot of bullying, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of burnout, there's a lot of expectation that people will deliver in this environment. There's a lot of thanks for stepping up yet again kind of thing, and pulling those extra shifts and taking on those extra tasks. I think the quid pro quo for putting teachers and healthcare workers out there in the community at the moment is that if that individual says, you know what, I want some goggles, I want a mask, that's not an expensive one, they're not burning through hundreds of them a day, I really think we need to talk about it and think about it carefully, because that gives them some hope that we also have their back. And I think it's just the compassionate and empathetic thing to do for people who are going out of their way to help us. We say how wonderful they are. Let's just see if we really are prepared to back that up as a community.
And that's all for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back at the same time next week, but for now, it's back to you, Ivan and Sarah.
Thank you, Nelson. This week's main news again. A WA nurse is demanding better industry leadership as they are beset by confusion, poor communication and a lack of unified voice during coronavirus. They want solutions for issues including COVID-19 patient care training, clearer information and resolve casual nurse unemployment.
And that's our weekly news and current affairs. We have the latest news on our website and social media pages.
Until next Sunday after 5:30 p.m, look after yourself, stay at home and have a pleasant evening.
Take care.